Jeff, welcome to the Wax Museum. Welcome back to the Wax Museum. This is your third time, isn't it?
Third time. I mean, yeah, it's. I mean, I must be doing something right if you're bringing me back for a third time. So
Sure. Well, you
we'll take
definitely
it.
bring a different perspective to the show. So I'm always intrigued because I'm like, this is the guy that's against social justice, and I'm like, how can you be against social justice? So we're gonna probe further into that.
Hey,
Um,
I'm a nice guy, right? I can be against social justice and be a nice guy, right?
he doesn't like justice. Um, But anyways, I guess what I've been asking my guests every time is like how you've been holding up with this whole lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty crazy in the sense of, so basically, ironically, the lockdown went into effect. The lockdown went to effect my birthday, so that would be March 16th.
Wow.
And so that was fun to celebrate my birthday, the first day of lockdown. But
Wow, that's crazy.
yeah, it's been very strange, um to be like, so like you can't really leave. Like, we can
Yeah.
go out like on a walk, but you have to stay away from everybody. You
Yeah.
always got to stay 6 feet away from people. You can go to
Yeah.
the store, but to get into the store, you got to wait in a line where there's like dots on the ground that are 6 feet apart, and you go
Yeah.
from dot to dot in line, and they
Yeah.
let 30 people in the store, and you're just like, this is like a strange world.
It is a strange world. And I think what's been really interesting because my day job is I'm an industrial hygienist.
Hmm.
And so I deal with human health hazards and advising people on how to protect themselves from human health hazards. And I just released a blog today for work, talking about the hierarchy of controls. And I kind of wish I would have taken some pictures at the grocery store because now they have like those glass panels
Hmm.
so that you're not like breathing on each other. It's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. They also put some dividers in between self checkout at one of the local grocery stores here too.
I did that.
Yeah,
I haven't even been to the store in a week and a half or so. So
yeah,
I don't even know what they've been installing. But I know, like, out here in California, I think the governor is requiring that, any business that is open, they have to have those glass barriers up, or the, plexiglass or whatever it is. And, they're taking all these different precautions. I think now,
yeah.
actually, in LA, you have to be wearing a mask. I think you might be having to wear gloves.
Mm,
Again, it's almost like you're watching like a movie about the future of like some
yeah,
outbreak, and you're just like, this
yeah.
is like life. I feel was it Planet of the Apes, where at the end of the movie, this was essentially happening. The new one with James Franco. Essentially,
Oh,
like, the end of
okay.
the movie, a virus jumped from the apes to the humans, and
Oh,
then they all
wow.
started breathing on each other, and then you just see like the dots going all around the world as everybody's traveling and touching each other and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, and that is the madness of this is that we have like this virus that is mutating. And so it was only animal to animal, and then it went from animal to human, and they didn't take it seriously at first because they're like, oh, it only goes from animal to human, so we don't need to protect ourselves to treat this guy. And then it went from human to human. And so it's like, so when, all these people are confounded and they're like, we're not sure how long this is going to be. It's like, well, it's because it keeps mutating. Like they don't really, nobody knows what they're doing. But
Right.
anyways, it's a crazy world we're living in right now. And yeah, I've been over the last couple of weeks, I've been reading quite a bit about coronavirus and figuring out what's going on, in the United States and Canada and how they're handling it with personal protective equipment and all that.
Hmm.
So the reason why I had you on the show was to talk about your book because I read your book. Thank you for
Oh
getting me
yeah,
access to that.
of course.
And so, I mean, I think a good place to start is talking about how you define social justice. And I believe it was probably in the intro. I don't know if it's a prologue or what it is, but
Yeah.
the intro to the book.
Yeah.
You said we have to separate the differences between social justice and real justice. Real justice is enforcing justice for the benefit of those actually harmed by an illegal behavior. Social justice is enforcing justice for the benefit of those who perceive to be who are perceived to be harmed by illegal behavior. So So basically, you're saying it has to be illegal for it to be unjust.
No, what I'm saying is that there are there's certain things, whether it's dealing with the law that we have here, like I'm in the United States, you're up in Canada, we may
Right.
have certain things that are different laws, but there's laws in the sense of what's legal and in illegal behavior. From a scriptural standpoint, we have God's laws.
Right.
And there are specific things that God says we should do and specific things that God says that we shouldn't do. And included in that are things like, you don't steal, you don't murder, you don't do things like that are commanded. You don't do that, right? The thing is that if you're enforcing those laws, you're enforcing actual justice. So if I steal from so and so, I should
Right.
be punished because I stole their $10 bill. The
Right.
problem becomes if with perceived offenses. And
Mhm.
that's when we start getting into like microaggression. That's when we start getting into a lot of the hierarchy between men and women, between Caucasian African Americans, between the rich and the poor. It becomes you're not necessarily sinning because of an action you're doing. You're sinning essentially because of who you are
Right.
in that sense. So that's
Yeah.
essentially how I'm kind of separating out actual justice from social justice.
And what I found, I know, I think our first episode we did together was mainly about social justice. And I think where I kind of found agreement with you was I don't think it's as systemic as the left is saying. Like it's like, oh, okay, you're gay, black, female, then it's like, wow, you got all the points, to say that you are oppressed, right? And it's like, well, you can't really say that to the white worker that got laid off because his job went to China. And I think we may have talked a bit too about how that was a big part of why Trump got elected, is because he's like, I'm going to bring back those jobs that went to China, right? Um, so that's kind of the interesting thing about it. It's like, because I do think, like there are times when we see, like mass incarceration of African Americans, and it's like, well, what is going on there? And, was the drug war, or the war on drugs, the drug war, the war on drugs. I gotta coin the right phrase, or people are gonna think I'm dumb. No, but so the war on drugs, they claim that um, it was primarily against African American neighborhoods because they were prosecuting, like crack, but not cocaine,
Mhm.
right? And there was all that stuff going on. And it's kind of interesting, like to see, how that argument works, because now you have, like young black men that grow up without a father, and it's kind of this perpetual cycle. And I think that's part of, like, so when we talk about systemic oppression, I'm like, well, I think there's a pretty good argument there that something's going on there, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, especially when you start getting into like drugs and police enforcement and things like that. You really have to look at what's going on. Is it an actual racial issue or is it a crime issue? And I think that, like for example, out here in California, you could go out to the inner city pretty quick. You could get into the ghetto where there's literally drug deals happening on the streets,
Right.
and it's rampant,
Yeah.
and it's literally just happening out in the open. And you see homeless people that are totally high out of their mind on
Hmm.
drugs. I mean,
Hmm.
if you looked at Los Angeles, it literally looks like a third world country
Yeah.
because you have so much drug use. You've got people that can't care for themselves, so they can't keep a job. It's a major problem. And the
Hmm.
thing is that a lot of times, the majority of the times, especially out there in the inner cities, they're actually committing crimes.
Right.
Now, in Beverly Hills, sure, there's some crime. It's probably a different. It's like white collar crime. It's different.
Right.
When you're dealing with the inner city, it's happening quite often. It
Yeah.
needs to be enforced, and I think that part of the problem is that when you're dealing with like gangs that are running a lot of these major parts of cities, of course you're going to have more arrests. You're going to have more people that are going to be incarcerated when they're involved in those communities where they are run by gangs, when gang violence is so prevalent, and basically they're reinforced from a young age. You need to be a part of this. This is your culture. This is who you are. This is your family. This is your friends. That, this is the way that is. And so, of course, there's going to be more incarceration when you're looking in those communities than you are in Bel Air or Beverly Hills or West Hollywood or whatever it is, because they're not run by gangs and gang violence and stuff in the same way that like Inglewood is or Long Beach or whatever that might be. So we have to, really look at why is it happening and not just take a big step back and look at the overgeneralities.
Yeah, and I think there's the perpetual cycle when it comes to like ethnic minorities where that happens. Because I mean, like this is happening in Canada too, right? Like we have a very high incarceration rate of Indigenous people. And so it's like, is it an inherently racist system, or is it because, like there's a big history there? I mean, as there is with African Americans, there's a big history of, they were treated poorly. They were not treated like human beings early on. And so it's like, how do we break that? How do we, repair that? Because it's, man, like I think, when I think about Canada, it started with the residential schools. I don't know if you've heard of the residential school system, but like
no, I haven't heard of that. No.
The idea was they were trying to assimilate the Indigenous people, trying to make them white, basically. And so they took these kids away from their parents, and it was like this Catholic system, trying to Christianize them. And there was a lot of abuse that happened. These kids, came back to their community not being able to speak English, not being able to speak their native tongue. And so there was like division that happened in families. And this occurred up until the 1970s. And even in the I think 70s and 80s, they were still taking, kids away from Indigenous families and putting them in white foster homes. And so there's been all this like kind of division between, the kids that become assimilated and those kids who do not, right? And so it's a big mess. And so we see the same kind of issue, and it's definitely culturally related, right? Like that's obvious that it's culturally related. And I think you could say that too with ethnic minorities in the United States, that it is culturally related. There's a culture that says, well, you come from the hood. That's what you do. And I mean, it's whether you're Latino, whether you're African American. I don't know about other minorities, but I mean, even in the city I live near too, like there's immigrant gangs, right? Like gangs where these people come from an immigration or they're immigrants anyways. And so it's hard to kind of sort out how much of that is just race, how much of it is culture, how much of it, but I mean, obviously, with African Americans, I mean, it started with slavery. And that in itself, it's like humans were a commodity, and they were able to get the Africans from Africa as a commodity.
Yeah. The thing about that is that, there's still, and I've seen even some of these like debates that are going on social media, even among like mainstream evangelicals, where they're almost like trying to justify slavery. And because they'll point to slavery in the Bible, and they'll say, well, it was okay then. Slavery in and of itself isn't bad. Yeah. Okay, fine. If you want to say that the way that God ordained slavery in Israel, it wasn't bad, I would agree with you, because it was essentially indentured servanthood, and you could literally be released after 7 years of working for somebody. It was basically you were working for room and board. Fair, right? Here we're talking about literally you go into Africa where the African tribes people were kidnapping other Africans, selling them to slave traders, kidnapping them, taking them to a foreign country, and then being sold as animals around this country. There's no sense of morality at all within the slave trade that happened in the United States. You can't even begin to justify that. And so again, when we're talking about difference between social justice and actual justice, that was an actual justice issue.
Well, and even from the obviously human rights, like that's clear that there's a human rights violation. But even you said they were kidnapped and then sold. So
Yeah.
even for people that thought they were property, they were violating their own morality for that. Wow,
Yeah.
that's crazy. I've never heard that end of it. Okay. So the ultimate goal, you said, for the social justice movement is to centralize political power. And evangelical leaders embracing social justice are being used for these purposes, whether they realize it or not. Useful idiots. So you believe that everybody that is pushing for social justice wants a centralized government?
I would say that those that originated it, yes. And in
Mm.
all reality, the majority of the time, when you look at a lot of people that are pushing social justice, what they're oftentimes pushing for is bigger government, more government regulation, and they want government enforcement of these social justice ideals. So thus, that the natural conclusion would be that they are looking for bigger centralized government.
So interesting. I was trying to figure out what my political stance is because I'm
Yeah.
pretty wide open on things. And I was thinking about how like even like from like somebody was trying to explain anarchy to me and like this idea of just like you have your community and you take care of your community. And I do really feel, a sense that a centralized government doesn't really understand people's needs properly.
Mm-mm.
And so it's like, and we see it in Canada, where, like we have our government in Ontario, and when they start dictating everything, it's like my province, Alberta, gets the shaft all the time. Like it's just, they're not doing what we need because their primary goal is to keep Ontario and Quebec happy because that's the bulk of our population. It's the way our system works, right? Right now, it's kind of funny because like during this whole COVID shutdown, it's like we're for the most part pretty united as a country. A lot of this
Yeah.
like kind of like back and forth isn't happening, which is good. Um, but yeah, so I've been thinking about like from a Canadian point of view, I don't like centralized government. I'd like more localized control. I would like our province to have more rights. Um, that said, I also really believe that a country on the world stage has a role to play too. And I would like, my nation to be a nation that's a good influence on the other nations, right? And so I don't want to get so bogged down either in, my province and all we care about is our province, right? So, um, but it's like so there's something about the social justice movement that lends itself to centralized power. And that's because you want to build all these regulations so that the rich don't get too rich. We want less billionaires, and now we want to spread that money to the bottom. Um, I guess to the marginalized, right?
Yeah. Well, and I feel like that's part of the problem is that when you actually start, it's one thing if you're making some of these arguments and you're talking about it from like let's say like a moral standpoint, and you believe that it's wrong and morally wrong to be making $1 billion where somebody else is making $12 an hour. If you believe that that's morally wrong, then go make that argument to the billionaire. Hey, you should be giving up your money and giving to those that aren't making as much money for you, thus equating the playing field of income inequality. But the problem becomes is that in all reality, that's not going to change anything because the billionaire is not going to just give up all of his money. So then the next logical step is that you have to go to a governmental authority who has the authority to redistribute those funds and take from the rich, give to the poor. Who would that be? That would be the government, and that would be through taxation and then turning around and giving it out through welfare. And so in all reality, what you're doing is you're finding a loophole through the government in order to take that person's money because you can't go directly to that person and get the money. So then instead, you're going to appeal to the government to then go to that person, take the money, and then they're going to redistribute it to those who aren't making as much. So it's just a roundabout way of taking from somebody else. It's basically it's breaking one of the commandments. It's coveting what somebody else has.
See, and I see that differently. I mean, like, first of all, I think about Jesus saying, "Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's." So I like this whole taxation is theft argument. I don't see that as a biblical argument.
Well, I would agree with you with taxation in general, and this is where
Right.
I would probably disagree with a lot of my more conservative friends. I tend to classify myself more libertarian or classical liberal.
Right.
But in and of itself, taxation is not a sin.
Right.
When it becomes a sin is when you're taxing people in order to give it to somebody else. So it's one thing if we're all chipping in for common resources, right? But if it's literally a bunch of people outvote the smaller minority of people who are wealthy and say, we're going to raise your taxes, not on us, but on you, so that way I can have benefits that you don't get access to. So that way, I want my free healthcare. I want welfare. I want free housing. I want income. I want X, Y, and Z. That's when it becomes theft. Taxation in and of itself isn't theft. It's that when you are using it to take from somebody else for your own benefit.
Yeah, and see, I've never seen like this whole idea of like take from them, not me, and give to the poor. That I don't really understand. Like, to me, it's like I look at it, I'm like, I'm middle class, I'm doing okay. If they, charged a little bit more tax on me and taxed the wealthy as well, and that money was able to go to programs that would help these people who need to get back on their feet, I'm okay with that, right? But this like vilifying billionaires and saying, no, we'll take all the money from the billionaires and that'll fix everything. I'm like, well, that's just silly.
They've got a lot of money, but they don't have all the money.
They don't have all the monies. And I mean, part of it too is like coming from the standpoint that every billionaire got it through ill-gotten gain, right?
Yeah.
And like, to me, it's like I don't know how they got their money. And so I mean, there's assumptions there, and it seems like one side is assuming they earned everything they've got, which I'm like, $1 billion. I don't know if you could earn every one of those cents, but on the flip side, just assuming it's because they're an evil person, I think that's something that I found really interesting. And I don't know if it's been the book or if it's been like your podcast, but like just talking about how like you don't do business with people and just be a terrible person and actually be successful, because people will not want to deal with you. And
well,
so
yeah,
that's
and see, like that's the thing that that I always bring up in because I believe in true capitalism and that sort of thing. But one of the things that we can apply as the consumer is we're able to vote with our dollar. Like one of the things I've been talking about with my podcast a lot lately is, one of the things that we as Americans should have been doing for years is stop buying things made in China. In order to because what's happened is that they're cheating the system by having extremely low paying wages for their employees.
Right.
They are, they don't have the same standards as we have here in the United States. They're constantly sending things over with like lead and poisoning, and then every so many years they're sending out another virus or another major disease that's jumping from animal to human, and it's just happening over and over and over again. We should be putting our dollar to support companies and organizations that are actually doing good work. And so when it comes to, the rich and the poor and how people actually make their money, like Walmart is one of the most powerful companies in the country. Like that family that owns Walmart are like billionaires on top of billionaires on top of billionaires is
right.
But at the same time, Americans continue to go shop there because they can buy stuff there cheaper than they can anywhere else. Walmart has a great business model in bulk buying, so that way they can then turn around and sell it to you for extremely low rates. And a lot of people vilify Walmart, but at the same time, they're providing a product for a lower price than anybody else can compete with, and so thus Americans keep going and buying their products from Walmart. That's not Walmart oppressing the poor. That's Walmart providing a service better than anybody else, and
Right.
thus they're making more money than anybody else.
Right. But I mean, like, so, I mean, who can afford to not buy stuff from China? You know, like, who are the people that are like, can make those consumer decisions? I mean, it's the same thing. Like, oh, well, I think, the principle of shopping at Walmart is terrible, but I really need a $5 t-shirt. You know what I mean? Like, it's so hard to get people to move in that direction because it would require, and I think, part of it is like, we need to live more modestly. Right? You don't need.
That's exactly what I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because like it's one of those things where, okay, cool, you can go buy a $5 t-shirt. Do you really need a $5 t-shirt? Do you really need a t-shirt? You know what I mean? Like that's the thing, is that maybe say instead of buying all of your t-shirts from Walmart for $5, save up and buy one that was made in the U.S. for $20. So instead of having 4 shirts, you've got one better quality shirt, and you're actually supporting, a better company that's actually paying living wages than a sweatshop in China. And so, maybe we need to have less stuff, better quality, and actually using our dollar to support companies that are doing it, that are doing a better job. And I think that's where capitalism should have a better role here, essentially in United States and in Canada too.
That's such a hard sell, though. You know what? I think it's the same thing too. Like, when we talk about, environmental issues and emissions and stuff like that, I think the solution to all of that is for us to live more modestly. I mean, it's the same thing with waste. People are like, well, I used all these like cardboard boxes, like Amazon shipping everything via cardboard boxes. It's like, are you kidding me? It's like, so now those are going to get recycled. How much energy does it take to recycle them? Like, it's silly, right? So it's like, can we live more modestly and not buy as much, just in general, so that we're not using as much packaging? Like, there's a lot of things, a lot of problems we could solve just by living a little bit more modestly.
No, I 100% agree. With my wife and I, we've gotten rid of pretty much all plastic out of our life. We've gotten, so we don't buy plastic bottles. We don't buy we don't get plastic packaging. We don't cook with, we're very intentional about the things that we cook with, very intentional about the things that we buy. And so from that perspective, we're not going to necessarily go buy as much stuff, but at the same time, the stuff that we do buy is going to be better quality, and it's also going to be made here in the U.S., or at the very least North America.
Yeah.
Primarily just because the standards are that much higher than somewhere in China, where they're literally using their of a few of the elite.
Well, and I think it's the same thing too here in Canada when it comes to oil. We have, like, our eastern provinces are getting oil from Iraq, like Saudi Arabia, I think. And it's like, what kind of environmental practices and what kind of human rights are there in the production of that oil? And yet people are vilifying, the oil sands in Alberta because they're like, oh, well, that's bad for the environment. And it's like, well, comparatively speaking, we have very strict laws in how we do what we do here, right? And so it's so difficult to educate the public on these things and to convince people, living modestly is the way we should be doing this. And like, it sounds weird to say, let's build a pipeline, across Canada, but that makes so much more sense than using an oil tanker to bring it across the ocean from Saudi Arabia. Like, are you kidding me? Like, anyways.
No, I'm totally with you on that one.
So, yeah, so you said that the Democrat Party once was for the working class, and now they're for the not working class. They are simply promising people free handouts whether they work or not. I was like thinking, I'm like, is that actually what they're doing? Or are they talking about like trying to get people on their feet? Like, are we talking about just like people sit at home and they just keep getting money? That's kind of what their model is? Or are they hoping to get these people, off their feet and into,
Well, to date, and so I've been watching as many of the Democratic primaries that I could watch. Obviously before the shutdown, and you can't really do the primaries or the debates anymore. But I haven't heard anybody actually put forth a plan that actually gets people on their feet. I've only heard people that encourage and enable people to stay on welfare. The only person on the Democratic side that I heard that actually had a logical plan and was still looking to, essentially give a handout, let's say, was Andrew Yang, who was talking about universal basic income. Yeah. And I felt if you're going to go down that route, because he was talking about exchanging, so no more welfare, that way we eliminate the bureaucracy, and it's just everybody's going to get $1,000 a month, no matter how much money you make. The problem is that with all of the welfare programs that we have here in the United States, they all have an income cap off, right? And so what ends up happening, I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to that are actually, getting, any of these welfare programs where they're either getting it for free or extremely discounted or Medicaid or whatever it is. And there's an income cap off. And so I've been told so many times by friends that they don't go out and get a job because they can't make over $20,000, $30,000, whatever that is. So they're demotivated to actually get on their feet, and they would rather rely on the government because it's free and they can stay at home all while getting that free income and that free health care and free everything. And that's part of the problem, is that it's demotive. It's doing the opposite effect of what they're claiming.
Yeah. So Yang was proposing $1,000 to every American, get rid of the welfare program, and then basically you get a job so you can live on more than $1,000 a month, because who wants to live on $1,000 a month? That's interesting.
And there was no income cap off. It was $1,000 for every adult. And I thought that way there's no demotivating factor. So it's like, if you're going to go down that route, which if I was president, I wouldn't, but if you're going to go down this welfare route, I feel like that was the way to go.
Yeah, and I didn't follow it too closely. I try not to get too wrapped up in American politics, because I just think it's silly for a Canadian to know that much. But I did follow Yang on Twitter, and I'm like, this guy just seems so smart. Like, I don't know why he's not the guy out of all of them. And now they got Joe Biden. I'm like, really? But it's fun though. Like he's fun. I think it's going to be very entertaining, especially him and Trump going back and forth. It's like, it's going to be a show.
If Biden can remember what month it is, or where he is, or
I don't know what's with you and like America and like super old politicians. Our prime minister's like 46.
Yeah.
Hey, dude.
I was rooting for in the beginning of the 2016 election. I was rooting for Rand Paul, younger guy. And then out of the Democrats this time around, I was rooting for Tulsi Gabbard or Andrew Yang, both younger guys.
Yeah.
Who gets picked? Like the oldest, craziest, dude. And I'm just like, what is happening?
I think Yang has a bright future though. That guy is he's very pragmatic, and it's like that's something you hardly ever see. But he's like also like he won't get into the mudslinging either. Like I was so impressed that it's like, like if he's gonna criticize Trump, he'll be fair in how he does it. He's not just gonna sling mud. And I'm like, I want more of that kind of politics. And it's so hard to find people that will do that. I was so fed up last Canadian election because I was like, I hate both of you. Like the top candidate, I was like, you know what? I'm voting third party because you both insulted my intelligence. Okay. Anyways. So yeah. Okay. So when you talk about like motivating people to work, something that I really like is this idea of microloans. And I haven't really studied this a whole lot, but the concept of like when you have a woman in a third world country, you give her, $1,000 and you say, this is a loan. You can pay it back to us once you get your business up and started. And she starts a business, I don't know, sewing something. Good example. And once she gets off her feet, she gives back the $1,000. And I'm like, what if the government was able to do investments? Because it's like, I was going to talk to a guy about the entertainment industry and why the government should fund the entertainment industry. And he gave me a whole bunch of like different examples of where it's actually an investment for the government. And I was like, see, that kind of thing makes sense to me. Instead of just giving people money, it's like, can we do investments?
Yeah, I mean, I would rather do it that way than what we're doing right
If
now.
you
But
had
at the
to.
same
Yeah.
time, yeah, if I had to, if I had to pick, if it was a binary
Yeah.
choice,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I tend to be, let's make the government smaller.
Yeah.
Let's get the federal government out of everything.
Hmm.
And that would lower taxes, that would eliminate a lot of restrictive regulations and make it easier for people to start businesses on their own, and then maybe be getting micro loans from anybody in general, as opposed to the government. Oftentimes what ends up happening is the government just messes everything up in general. So it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, they're probably going to mess that one up as well.
I wonder, like, okay, so the government messes everything up. I wonder if, like, and this has always bothered me about government. Do you think it's because the government's always on a 4-year plan? Like, they got four
Partially.
years to show you they're doing something awesome.
Uh, Honestly, I don't know if it's necessarily the 4-year plan. So I think what it is in all reality, there's a combination of things. So you have the president who's on a 4 to 8 year plan, right?
Right.
And then you have the Congress people here in the states that are on an indefinite plan. So all they're looking at is the next election, getting reelected, reelected, reelected. Whereas the
Yeah.
president, they can only be in for 4 to 8 years, max.
How long are Congress, like, what are their terms?
Uh, I should totally know this. I believe House of Representatives, I think, is 2 years, and then
So
Senate's either 4 or 6.
So how would they be thinking any more than a 4-year plan either? Like it's like you're thinking very short term because you got to get reelected. Like it's like a job interview. It's like a 4-year job interview. You got to make
Mm,
people believe you're something.
yeah.
And
Well,
then when the
in part
4
of the
years is
in part
up, sorry.
and that's why I've been for setting term limits, so that way at least at some point there is an end game where at least in the final term, let's even just say it was a 2-term term limit, in the second term they don't have to worry about reelection, so they're just going to do what they actually believe. I grew up in Arizona where we had somebody like John McCain. He'd always campaign as a conservative, and then he would go and actually govern as a more liberal in
Hmm.
Washington D.C. And everybody was really frustrated, but nobody could compete with his money and resources and his name, and so pretty much nobody ever ran against him
Hmm.
that had any kind of credibility. But it was always very frustrating to where he would be conservative the 6 months before up until election cycle, and
Huh.
it was that time every single election cycle, and it was very frustrating for a lot of Arizonans.
Interesting. Haven't heard that about John McCain.
I,
Um,
I grew up in his territory. It was everybody that I knew was always frustrated with that.
So interesting because I have family that says the opposite about the liberals here in Canada. They're like they
Hmm.
govern like or they campaign like they're progressive, and then they rule like conservatives. So maybe not conservative enough for Alberta. But, okay, so you said for whatever reason we are finding the modern day evangelical church leaders pushing this agenda, promoting victimhood instead of responsibility, entitlement instead of a strong work ethic, and ultimately promoting selfishness instead of humility. This is shocking because it goes against everything the Bible teaches. So victimhood, entitlement, and selfishness.
That's ultimately what social justice is actually promoting, in my opinion.
Hmm. Entitlement's a really interesting thing because what I see is entitlement on both sides a lot of times on these, right? Because you've got like like for me, I'll start with me because it's easier for me to talk about me. And I'm like, I do believe there is such thing as privilege. I believe, like I was born in a Christian home. I would call that spiritual privilege. I was born in a home where I got to know God. Other people don't have that. And so because of that, I believe I want to share my privilege with other people, right? I want to use my privilege to spread God to other people. And then, the fact that I was in a position where I could go to university and I was able to get, student loans and then pay them off. And, but I started with things that other people don't have. And so as a result, it's like, I'm very blessed to be where I am. I've worked hard for everything I have, but it's like, I did start with things. And I think, what happens is a lot of times we'll have people who are self-made people. They believe they are self-made people and they don't believe in privilege at all. And that can become entitlement. Where on the other side, what you're saying is we've got these so-called victims that feel entitled. And to me, entitlement on both ends is wrong.
It's interesting. I think that a lot of it depends on what, like when I'm talking about entitlement, I'm talking about somebody who feels entitled to something that they didn't earn, which kind of flies in the face of even when we're talking about like the gospel, and even when we're talking about like sharing the gospel. I don't feel entitled to be saved. So like if I'm not a Christian, right, I could feel entitled that I should get into heaven just because of me.
I'm a good person.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, but it doesn't matter how entitled you are. You can never get there. You can never get there until you realize that I can't get there on my own and I need Christ. So it's ultimately the opposite of entitlement in order for us as Christians to get into heaven. And I think that there's a parallel there when it comes to like economics and things like that, where we're looking at you have to actually, when it comes to the economy and money and finances, you actually have to go out and earn it. You're not entitled to somebody else's money, and that's very clear in Old Testament law. You're not entitled to somebody else's money. If somebody else earns it, that's theirs. And I think that we have here in the United States, we have an entitlement mentality with a lot of people, and a lot of it's created by welfare and redistribution of wealth and retributions and things like that, as opposed to let's get people motivated to actually get out and be entrepreneurial, go out and get a job, be self-supportive. I feel like that would go a lot longer and be a lot more effective than just constantly giving out handouts and then making people feel like they're entitled to that handout.
Yeah, and I don't think, people should feel entitled. And maybe that's where the problem with the word justice is, right? Because it's like, well, this person was raised, in a home where, had an alcoholic father, and their mother died when they were young. And so they didn't really have a chance to even, get to school every day. They didn't have enough food to eat, there's all these things going against that person. And so for us to like say, well, we want to help that person is one thing. Man, no, like you think there's a certain level though of human rights, that we should be giving people and saying, well, you should have a right to enough food to live on at least,
Yeah. Well, that's where historically here in the United States, it used to be that that churches and Christian charities were the ones that the poor would turn to, and the people that were struggling would turn to in order to get assistance and get help. And then you started having the government in the early 1900s come along, and they started trying to essentially push out the church and start giving entitlements and welfare and food and all that kind of stuff to the poor. And a lot of that was trying to create a dependency on the government. And so what ended up happening was the Christian charities and the churches started getting pushed to the side. And a lot of times, even now, a lot of times the government makes it virtually impossible for a lot of charities and in Christian churches even to be helping the poor or be offering assistance, and they say no, leave that to the government. That's the government's role. That's not your role. Or if you're going to do it, you have to have it with a licensed so and so charity that's working directly with the local government. And so what's happening is that we're pushing everybody to the government, whether directly or indirectly, as opposed to pushing for charity within your local community. If you see somebody in need, help them. If you instead, what we're seeing is, well, the government will take care of it, so I don't have to do anything myself. I can spend my money on me, kind of a thing. And I think that we've kind of lost that here in the United States of trying to help our brother that's in need. And a lot of it's because we just know, well, just go apply for that government program. The government will help you. And I think that's a problem that's creating dependency. And then it's this cycle of, okay, so now they're not poor, now they're not living on the streets, but now they're never actually going to get out of being in the lower class because now they're depending on the government for all of their income. They're not actually learning, they're not growing as a person, they're not actually being self-supportive, which is the ultimate goal for all of us anyway.
Well, and I think what's been really interesting in the episode that I just released on Saturday, I was talking to Jimmy Humphrey about meaning. And it's like finding meaning, because there's a lot of people who are stuck at their home. Some people are working from home, but there's people that are out of work completely. And like, even I think, people that are in ministry, I think there's a lot of people that are feeling like everything they do is now gone. And it's like, who am I anymore? And I know this is like huge among artists too. Like, I was just listening to an artist, I totally forgot his name, but he's a guitar player, and he was like saying, like during this whole, lockdown, he's like, well, I'm not playing guitar right now. And I'm like, who am I? And I'm like, that's so interesting. As you're talking about this, I'm just like, well, instead of worrying so much about like, okay, well, there's all these people that are getting government handouts, and I get it. You don't want that to happen. I understand that. But it's like those people who are getting government handouts, and if there are, a significant amount of people that are just like, well, I'm not going to work because it's not worth it. Those people are still missing meaning in their lives. And so I think it would be really interesting to see the church actually not just provide food or provide money, but come to those people and be like, hey, so what do you do? Like, what do you do really well? What do you really enjoy? And finding, helping people connect with their passions would be such an incredible ministry for someone to do. And I know, like, one of the things that I said in the last episode was there was like a painter, and somebody said, well, why are you a painter? And he said, because I like the smell of paint. And I was like, whoa, like finding your passion can be as easy as that. And I'm like, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing if the church actually did that? And again, like with that kind of thing, that could be something that is an investment, because you buy that painter, like paints and canvas and, but eventually they start making money off of it, right? And I just think there's a lot of opportunity there, because people do need meaning, and that's becoming very evident right now during COVID.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think that's part of the problem with just the handouts, and that goes both from the government as well as from charities too. Is that a handout? It's like that old saying, like if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he can eat for a lifetime. And right. I think that's what's missing in the equation in dealing with like the income inequality and poverty and things like that. Is like you're not actually teaching them to get out of poverty. You're just giving them a handout, which is maybe getting them a little bit better, but then you're keeping them there. And that's part of the problem. Like for me, when I'm saying let's get rid of handouts, I'm looking at what's actually good for that person. What's actually good for that person is to get them out of the lower class and at the very least into the middle class, where they can be self-supportive, have a job, have a career, have a business. That's the ultimate goal. But I feel like we're stunting people by giving them the handouts and making them feel entitled and making them feel like, well, I can't go out and get a job that makes $31,000, because if I make $31,000, I'm going to lose all of my free stuff. And that's a major problem that I think that we have.
I think that's a major selling point of your argument right there. And I think, you know, like with any of these things, like I feel like there's a compassionate argument that can be made that would actually appeal to people who are like, well, I'm compassionate. That's why I want these people to be helped. And it's like, well, I'm compassionate. I want these people to have meaning to their lives. And it's like the same thing too. I was thinking about the border and how to solve the border issue in America. And I was thinking, you know, like the one of the biggest reasons why people are coming across the border is because people are willing to hire them illegally and treat them like garbage.
And pay
Because
them less than minimum wage.
because their business model includes exploiting immigrants because they could not pay an actual citizen what they're paying those people. And it's
Exactly.
like, so what if the government cracked down on those businesses, right? And I'm like, that would be, I mean, I think we could all agree that's a great way to, like, you can penalize those companies for what they're doing.
Well, like I was saying before, I grew up in Arizona, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had a sheriff, famous sheriff, Joe Arpaio, and he was cracking down on all those companies. And you know what everybody called him?
A racist?
Yep. Because he was profiling. And so they called him a racist for he would literally go and he would do raids at all these companies that were employing illegal immigrants. Right. And you know, there was quite a few like we literally went to a Mexican restaurant one time, had dinner, and then we drove by the next day and it was closed because they had done a raid that night and shut the business down because they were employing a bunch of illegal immigrants. And so we did that, and the guy got totally obliterated by the media and you know, in politics and just in everything. And you know, there's a major problem here. And so I think that the best, you know, from my perspective, the best way to do it is let's get people in here legally. And you know, if we can stop people at the border, we're also going to be stopping human trafficking. We are also going to be stopping the drugs and the cartels and all that kind of stuff, because it all goes hand in hand. And again, I'm looking at what's best for the people that are coming over here to the United States. The best thing is for them not to sell their soul to the cartel and be drug mules to come over here to the United States, which is a huge, major problem.
It is insanity. Because, I mean, like, just talking about, from the human rights perspective of the people that are trying to cross the border, I've heard stories about girls who have to take birth control because they know they're going to get raped on the way across the border. I'm like, that is so terrible. And it's like, it's a hazard. And it's like, they're that desperate to get out of there. And I'm like, so what is going on in Mexico? What's going on in South America that is making these people so desperate to get out? And I'm like,
communism, really? Like, because a lot of them are coming from like South America and Venezuela and a lot of these South American countries. And it's socialism and communism that's driving people away, because they literally cannot make a living for themselves because of the overbearing regulations and overbearing government. Like, there is no freedom. They want freedom. We have freedom here, but if you want that freedom, you got to come here legally, not only for the betterment of our country, but for the betterment of you. We don't want you getting raped on the way up here. We don't want you being a drug mule. We don't want you being abused by the cartel. But the only way to stop that is to stop the complete inflow of illegal immigration and then funnel people through the proper channels. It's not just for our safety, it's for their safety too.
Yeah, and people don't hear enough of that end of it.
No, not at all.
Okay, so one more thing that I really loved about your chapter was talking about entrepreneurship. And it was so interesting because at the time that I was reading your chapter, I was finishing up my contract working for a major oil company, and going back to the consulting company. And I was thinking about how much of an opportunity it is, because the consulting company I work for is very small. And so I have a lot more influence there than I would working for the oil company, because I was just the contractor. I go out and collect the samples, write reports. But it's like, now it's just like, okay, so what is our marketing plan? What is our, and getting back into that. And I was like, this is a really interesting point. And especially when we talk about how the economy is kind of being shut down due to COVID, I really believe innovation is what's going to win here. And so you were saying that they make it too difficult for small businesses to initiate things.
Yeah. Well, like out here in California, which is one of the more progressive states in the United States, you have to jump through so many hoops. You have to file so much paperwork. You have to
Right.
pay so many permits and licenses and fees, and get the health department to check this and do that. And
Yeah.
it becomes a huge major thing if you want to have virtually any kind of business or create an LLC or virtually anything.
Hmm.
And that's a major problem. And especially, one of the easiest things historically for Americans to do, if you're looking at American history, was, well, do something with food or, like a small little grocery store or whatever it is. But then there's so many regulations that you have to jump through just to
Hmm.
open up a tiny little taco stand or a tiny little
Right.
restaurant,
Right.
and so it's going to take like hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to open something like that up. That's virtually impossible for the average American to do. And
Right.
so one of the things that I think that we could do would be to eliminate it would be to lower taxes. It would
Hmm.
be to eliminate a lot of the overbearing regulations by both the federal government and the local government as well, and open up the economy for people to really promote small business. Because right now what's happening is a lot of the regulations that are being passed, like even discussions on like the raising the minimum wage and different
Yeah.
things like that, the only people that can actually afford to do that are the big companies. The
Mm.
small little mom and pop shops, how are they going to absorb increasing their what they're paying their employees by 30% or
Right.
40%? They can't afford that. Walmart, they can afford it. McDonald's, they can
Right.
afford it because they're making billions and billions of dollars.
And when you make those kinds of regulations, they aren't thinking about the small businesses at all.
Not at
They're
all.
thinking about, well, Walmart can afford to pay their employees more. Of course they can,
Yep.
but the mom and pop shop, no. And the other thing I thought was really interesting, we don't teach, our education system is not set up to teach people to be entrepreneurs. How would you change our education system so it would raise our children to be entrepreneurs?
I think a lot of it would be to really push problem solving and not make it to where everything
Mhm.
is cookie cutter, because right now
Right.
everything is standardized across the
Yeah.
board.
Yeah.
Like I even remember, I think it was my brother when he was in elementary school. He was having a problem because he was constantly getting in trouble because he was done with his test early, and then he kind of goof off because he's like, hey, I'm done. So he's like goofing off and whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the school was trying to, say that he's got ADD. It's like, well, no, he wasn't being challenged enough. And so he was
Hmm.
already done with his work and just wasting time.
Yeah.
If we could figure out a system that encourages creativity, that encourages
Yeah.
thinking outside the box. Like obviously
Yeah.
you've got your standard things like mathematics and English and certain things that's like, okay, those you can't really think outside the box when it comes to 2 plus 2. But when you're talking about, not just everything is yes sir, no sir, that basically what they're doing with the education system is constantly reinforcing to the students to be employees. Your
Right.
teacher is the equivalent of your boss. And so
Yeah.
if we could get away from that a bit and find a system, and I don't fully know the exact way in the structure that we have right now, but I know that there's some good charter schools and some good private schools that really make it less of a employee to an employer relationship and more of a mentor to a mentee relationship, which I think could be
Yeah.
a lot more effective.
I really, really like that idea because I know for me, I think I would have benefited from a less traditional school system as a kid. Like, I don't think my giftings were recognized in the school system. And it wasn't until I got out of it that I was like, oh, my brain works a little bit different than other people's. And I realized it was actually a good thing. And it took me years to figure that out. And it's kind of interesting as I watch my children and their kind of differences, and it's like, how can we harness these differences? And it's like being able to be more individual in our approach. And I mean, it's difficult. I was a classroom teacher. I know how difficult it is to like do a different program for every student. So I think we need some innovation for sure in our education system.
Yeah,
And I mean,
and one thing I wanted to say about that while we're just talking about it really quick is I really think that coming out of this whole coronavirus crisis right now, entrepreneurship is our way out of that. And if we
yeah,
can get away from relying on the big box companies and start getting back to the small mom and pop shops, I think that that's going to be a lot more effective and a lot better for our local communities and for people in general, and to be able to raise wages and all that kind of stuff. Because right now, what we saw with all of this, even before the government came down and cracked down on the stay-at-home orders and all that kind of stuff, we saw Amazon made a decision to shut down all travel by all of their subsidiaries, right? They own all these different kinds of companies, right? That affects so many different industries. If one company makes one decision that affects thousands and thousands and thousands of employees across the country, right?
yeah,
And so again, we come back to centralized power. If we could split that up a little bit and have little mom and pop shops all across the country and a bunch of small businesses, then what we can do is not have everything so centralized and have one person like Jeff Bezos make one decision that then is going to reverberate across the entire country. And I think that that's going to be something huge that I've been really encouraging on my podcast lately. I've been really hammering home, take this time while we're all on lockdown and come up with something that you can be working on the side. Try to, if you've always wanted to try to build a company, do it, because now is the time to do it.
Got all the time on your hands. And you know what I'm thinking as you were saying this? I'm like, what we need is a mom and pop Amazon.
Yep.
Like seriously, like a local place that makes a local product that they deliver locally. And I'm like, Amazon says they will have it to you in 2 days. We can have it to you by 3 p.m. today. You know what I mean? Like that would be cool. And it's personalized, right? And I think that getting people to think more locally would be incredible. And that's something I think we can all get behind. And I think we're realizing that even with, the PPE supplies. And like, I was really shocked, when the whole Trump thing went down, I was very frustrated that he was like, I'm not sending that stuff to Canada, right? And he was trying to shut down the company from doing that. And I'm like, I don't know if we can get manufacturing happening in Canada. Well, there was a guy in BC that's like, yeah, I'm going to make N95s. And I'm like, what? Really? So, I mean, innovation is happening and we're forced to innovate. And I think this has been a wake-up call about us getting things locally. And I know America had to ramp up their production locally of a lot of those products that they need right now. Anyways, Jeff, thank you for coming on. I know you have the book. What's the best way for people to learn more about your book?
Yeah, so if you go to gatekeepersonline.com/store, you can go there and you can check out the book. I've also got some other resources and stuff there as well. But if you just click on the book cover, then we'll have a bunch of information there. We've got a bunch of great authors that contributed to the book, and we just literally just break down all the different social justice issues, and it was a blast putting together.
It was a blast to read. Thank you, Jeff.
Yep, of course. Thank you.